Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And for those joining us from the US, good morning. Today, we are talking about privileged access management, which is a very hot topic right now. And we have one of our key partners from Remediant today with us, JD Sherry. And we're very excited to present to you what privileged access management means. And you're going to gain a lot of practical tips today and insights into how to assess your risk internally. So before we kick off, JD, can you take a moment to give the audience a quick introduction to who Remediant are and a little bit about yourself?
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Good morning to folks here in the States, and good afternoon, everybody abroad. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Ray Luca, for having me on, and certainly love Smarttech247 and the relationship we've had over the years, and even going back to my days when I was with Trend Micro. So JD Sherry, I've been with Remediant about 3 years now. I have been leading the sales organization, but come from this role in a place of an operational background. So for many, many years, I've served as a IT and security practitioner, and even our co-founders are the same way, right? They come from practitioner backgrounds and looking at problems from that lens. And really, Remediant was birthed out of that lens of looking at privileged access from a practitioner's viewpoint. So our co-founders, Tim Keeler and Paul Lanzi, worked in large pharmaceutical organizations on the security and IT side, and fundamentally started to see a trend and a pattern that is very unsettling, and quite frankly is still the trend and the pattern today, with administrative accounts being the primary focal point of an attacker to try to get those accounts and be able to move laterally across the organization to the proverbial crown jewels, right? So they started to see breach responses within their organization have this blueprint. And then even as Tim Keeler spun out to start Remediant as a professional services organization, focusing on breach response, even where traditional tools to try to solve this problem, AKA password vaulting solutions, things of that nature, seem to be not holding up at solving this problem. And by and large, because workarounds to those solutions, because they're a little bit challenged operationally to use, we're often the culprit of those accounts outside of those solutions being compromised and still breaches happening. So really, Remediant was designed to look at this problem differently, look at it from not just a compliance and a security controls issue, but something that an operator could use in their day-to-day job and not be disrupted by it. So that's really the genesis of Remediant, and we're focused on trying to reduce the 80% of attacks using admin credential metric, trying to drive that to go down versus seeing that go unchanged year over year over year. It's something has got to be done to stop that problem, right?
And that's a great mission. I mean, to have that mission, to be able to reduce that statistic, as you said, 80%, that's pretty big. And with everyone now working from home, I feel that the security landscape has changed a little bit. And I think access control is definitely changing, especially with the fast adoption of remote working options. How have you noticed this change from a Remediant perspective, and how has it affected privileged access control?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, you and I are representation of people working remote and being able to try to function and still do our jobs just like everybody else. Well, I think IT and security organizations, as I saw things unfold here in the States, into February, first part of March, and even to current day, they were scrambling very quickly to mobilize for a new kind of normal with the remote workforce. And when you're doing that, you're trying to make sure your VPN concentrators can handle remote connections more than they've ever been before. And your cloud security products are set up and ready to go for email and things like that. And even provisioning laptops, right? Getting people that can have laptops to go, right? So that was a basic function of like step one. And with that, what I've seen over my years as a practitioner is when you're trying to move to enable the speed of the business, in this case, in a global pandemic, you often struggle to focus on the security aspects of that, right? So the attackers are flourishing on that. And you guys said it well in your most recent webinar around email phishing. Those kinds of attacks have just skyrocketed more than they already are, which is astonishing. And that is the whole premise built on let's focus on the distraction that is the global pandemic, where IT and security professionals are looking at this ball over here to get people up and running and provisioning, and maybe security is taking a back seat during this. Mm-hmm. And then all that to say is now our attack surface, which quite frankly was big to begin with, has just increased tenfold now because of everybody being out on their home networks, commingling with their kids' iPads and their IoT devices and Netflix and you name it, right? All of that really exacerbates the challenge of protecting not only regular access to corporate networks, but even more laser focused on the administrative access once they're on a corporate network. So, I think that's starting to normalize a little bit now. People are able to go, okay, I've got the capacity. People seem to be comfortable. The service desk can handle the questions that are coming in from the remote workforce. Now, how do we look at that security landscape differently to make sure that this hasn't opened up 10 new doors for attackers to come in with administrative credentials as their weapon to move laterally, because vulnerabilities have increased because of the remote workforce. So we see that pretty significantly right now.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, we've seen an increase of nearly 5,000% in phishing attacks, and most of these attacks have, a common motivation to steal credentials. So I 100% echo what you say. What is the difference between more traditional methods for privileged access management versus the new, as you've said?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see the approach really since the mid-90s, if you can imagine this, of trying to address this problem. And I think it's been, a very good industry to try to give organizations at least a chance to fight against this challenge. But the traditional approach to securing privileged accounts is using password vaults to find those accounts, rotate those accounts that have access to the crown jewels, and rely on that password rotation as the mechanism to say, hey, let's make a complex password, let's rotate it and change it, and then that's going to be our mechanism when somebody gets phished, as your last webinar was addressing, that they can't use those phishing credentials because we've changed the password on them, right? So I think that served its purpose as a phase one, but where you see the evolution of this going is the challenge with that is not so much about protecting a password, because attackers are very crafty, right? They're going to not only get a phishing password, they're going to get a hash, which is, the computer binary generated component of your username and password, or they're going to get what is called a golden ticket, which is Kerberos tickets, things like that they can just replay that across your environment. So the thing that we're trying to change the mindset on, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the concept of zero standing privilege, is really let's go to security 101. Like, think about when firewalls were built. Firewalls were built to default deny any traffic, don't let anybody in. But then fundamentally, you have to do business, right? So you open up certain ports and you open up different protocols to do business. We want to go back to that default deny position with regard to privileged access. Don't let any of those accounts be on your systems. And that's called standing privilege. So the mindset is shifted to, instead of thinking you're going to vault every account in your organization, go with the fact that these accounts are out there and they exist, discover them on a continuous basis, and then remove them so they're not persistent, but then give the business access to them just in time when they need it, and tie it into a protocol like multi-factor authentication to be able to ensure that no matter if and when that password gets compromised, even if it's a dictionary, right, as far as length and strength, you're going to be covered, because that account can't be used to move from one computer to one computer to one computer throughout the network, right? That's really the shift in the mindset of the legacy way versus the next generation way.
And I guess it's important to look at what drives security in your organization. Is it compliance? Because as you know, at Smarttech247, we have a pretty comprehensive governance, risk and compliance department, and we often run these gap analysis for our customers to measure their information security levels and identify weaknesses. And of course, privileged access management is an important security control in those gap analysis. But because most regulations, let's say it's compliance that drives your security, most regulations don't say you need to have a tool in place, you need to have a practice and a process in place. So a lot of companies don't really understand what the best practice is. And when we do run the gap analysis, we ask the question, we look at a sample evidence and we drive past that. But that doesn't mean that it's implemented correct. So as you can imagine, it isn't great for many companies that have a huge supply chain and they rely, for example, on their vendors to have the proper checks in place. Yeah. So our organizations sometimes overlooking the importance of privileged access management.
I mean, as somebody that sat in the chair, I think realistically, yes. And you are so right, Raluca, on the old battle of security versus compliance, and are those mutually exclusive? And I'm just going to call it out. I mean, this privileged access industry primarily has been built on compliance-driven metrics and goals in passing audits, passing regulatory issues, because everybody knows that those accounts are important, but it's been primarily policy-driven. And you bring up an excellent point, whether it's a big four consulting firm that's coming in and doing audits, or it's more specific boutique firms that have local touch and high value. They're all going to come in and say, what are you doing for your privileged accounts? Who has access to what? And many a times that is going to be a very small sample set in which you're asking for it as an auditor or a compliance-driven person. And then you're also going to be limited on a very small set of scope for what they're potentially looking for. It might be the financial systems, right? It might be the healthcare systems. And honestly, that small of a scope is not your only scope that you have to focus on, right? Even if you're doing that well, you have this whole other area. And let's use workstations as an example. We just spent a few minutes talking about the remote workforce. What about those systems that potentially could be compromised and then pivoted into those sensitive systems, right? And that happens all the time. So really, when you look at, and I'm guilty of writing a blog of security versus compliance, right? I think every practitioner looks at that. I think you can achieve both, okay? And what I mean by that is you can use capabilities to make sure that you're using transparency and for auditability and compliance, but you can give the IT folks and the security folks the tools to do their job and plug into their existing workflows that don't severely disrupt what they do. And I will tell you this, that's often a challenge with the way privileged access management has been done. It's been too difficult for operations to use.
And I guess it's difficult to also justify the budget, because a question from management could be, why can't you just do it yourself? Just, review the rules and apply the rules yourself. So do you have any tips for people on like how to justify the budget? And what I would be really interested to see from the audience as well, we have a poll coming up on how many people apply privileged access. I guess we'll see that in a minute. But back to you. Would you have any tips for people requesting budget?
Yeah, I mean, I will say compliance budget has driven the purchase of some of these tools. What quickly comes into view is a couple things. Mergers and acquisitions. Companies buying other companies are like, okay, we're inheriting companies that don't have very good cybersecurity, and privileged access is a big component of that. So M&A budgets are now looking at ways to put a lens on cybersecurity and what they're about to take on in the due diligence process. you guys do incident response and penetration testing as part of your offerings, right? So we see many customers that if you look at the numbers, their IR response is going to be looking at, well, we had X, Y, and Z accounts compromised, and that's what the attacker used to walk the network and get our data and move it out of the building, right? So incident response often drives and should drive action around how we discover and protect privileged accounts, because as soon as you go through the triage of fighting that response, right, and getting the company back to normal, it could be ransomware, it could be just a fundamental phishing attack that led to a stolen credential. We often see organizations, once they kind of get that solved, that little immediate problem solved, they go on to doing life and doing business, but they fail to miss the broader macro view of, you still have this all outside. It's like cancer in your network, right? It's really, privileged accounts are spread all over your network, just waiting for the attackers there. So IR will often shine a light on privileged access control problems, Active Directory problems, right, that need cleanup and management. And we see budget come from that. And then the other thing that we're starting to see is DevOps. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about that, but DevOps and IT automation is, how can I abstract away the notion of needing privileged access for those operational roles, because they're the ones that get most frustrated when you slow their work down of pushing code out through continuous integration, continuous development, or slowing them down to just go do a patch on Microsoft Black Tuesday or managing an incident. So you've got to plug into those existing workflows, and the beauty of APIs and integrations with those tools, it makes that easier now. And I think that's a very important part to then say, hey, the development team, we can work with you to share budget to make our environment more secure, because you're using the cloud, and we want to make sure the cloud is secure. And by doing that, we want to automate and improve access control to the cloud. So therefore, maybe there's some budget shared between development, and maybe there's some budget shared from security. And then compliance really stripes across all of that, right? Because they want every facet of IT and security to be compliant. So maybe they'll contribute some budget to that. So I can't just earmark security saying they're the sole responsible people for making sure privileged access is on the right trajectory. It's really it stripes across all facets of the business, and we see our sales process reflecting that too, where we have to educate more stakeholders about the impact of this so they can understand how it's going to impact their business.
I guess that's a great tip. Yeah. And since you're on the subject of DevOps, and let's talk about that a little bit, because what is important in companies is that we foster a culture of security first, and then we engage all stakeholders of the business, right, in all departments. So if you look at DevOps, right now we live in a world where basically almost every company on the planet is doing some sort of software development, and it's becoming very agile, and it's fast, and we need a product fast, and sometimes security is overlooked depending on the internal processes of a company. Each process requires access privileges for each action, and it's a very dynamic nature, the world of the DevOps. So how do you manage that? How do you firstly explain to developers that they may not need admin privileges for every single thing, and how can we implement the PAM best practices for something like that?
Yeah, no, that is a phenomenal question. So a couple of things. My background is cloud. I have a lot of experience in deploying cloud, securing cloud, and the interesting thing that I used to say, and it is, I'll bring up an oldie but a goodie term, shadow IT, right? So everybody gets that. Everybody's tired of that. They're tired of the term cloud as well. But what I want to do is drill down on the shadow part of it, because what has happened now is most organizations are dabbling in the cloud. They have a multi-cloud strategy, right? They're looking at AWS, they're looking at maybe a third party, or they're looking at Microsoft. And what we're seeing is the shadow IT piece is still out there, But what is now prevalent in DevOps in particular is shadow access. So I'm going to use the term shadow access because it's one thing to spin up new infrastructure, right? We all know that's easy. Credit card can do it. Well, what happens is that starts to, again, increase your attack surface, and you're spinning up access issues when you're spinning up new infrastructure. And if you don't, if you have a problem with access control in your environment today, it's going to go up tenfold when you start going out to the cloud, right? So what we're focused on, and what I see clients focused on, is how do I, we call it automating security into the recipe of DevOps. And recipe is often a term used for like Chef and Puppet and some of these continuous integration and continuous development tools, to where developers are building this into their workflows to streamline how quickly they can get code out. Now, what we want to emphasize is you should do that for security too, right? And access control is a big deal. So when you spin up something in AWS, or you even spin up something in a DevOps environment, if you have your own private cloud, you should be doing that with the thought of, I don't want access to be default on. You shouldn't do that, right? And then developers, they're probably the most demanding as far as, I need access all the time when I need it, right? Just let me do my job. So what we want to be able to do is still give that to them, but allow them to get it in an elegant way when they need it, not all the time. Okay. And you can do that in an agentless fashion by baking in technologies. You know, Remediant is a very focused CI/CD and DevOps platform, to where that's just baked into their recipe. And then when they do need to get it, they can get just-in-time administration, right? And that seems to keep everybody happy. And I don't think a developer would go, hey, your account's going to be compromised and you have access to 1,000 servers in AWS. Are you okay with that? They wouldn't be okay with that. Nobody wants to have that on their shoulders. But if you tell them, we're not going to put your account on there all the time, and we're going to put it on there when you need it, and we're going to tie it to multi-factor authentication, then, and we're not going to slow you down, that's the last piece, then they seem to warm up to that. So it's really speaking their language. It's developing solutions that plug into what they know, and it doesn't feel clunky and it doesn't feel bolted on. And then I think everybody can kind of get behind that, because security is everybody's responsibility, right? Not just security's.
Yeah.
So
that's a great point. The culture is important, and it's important for organizations to foster a culture of security, and it has to come from the top. So that's why standards like ISO 27001 are great, because it allows you to create the policies from the get-go, get everyone inducted in training, and implement security by design in all of the projects that you're working on.
That's right.
I can see here that a lot of people are saying, we had a question, which of the following is the main reason for your organization might not implement PAM? And some people are saying it's too difficult and time consuming to implement. So I guess I'm very curious to see any kind of new features that you guys have been working on in Remediant. Would it be possible to show people the platform quickly?
Not a problem. I think in looking at the poll, and I love this platform, by the way. This is one of the coolest webinar platforms I've been on. It's not surprising to me that 50% or greater than 50% of our poll is saying that. And the one right below it, if you look at that, it's almost 85% of the responses lack of knowledge around PAM. This is so, and those two can be tied together, because if I have lack of knowledge and I hear in the industry it's too hard, I'm not going to do it.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just not going to do it. And this is something we can't not do, if that makes sense, right? So, when we look at this, this problem has to be addressed in something that's easy to digest and easy to manage and easy to solve. And I will be brutally honest, we're only a 4-year-old company, right? So we haven't had the luxury of building software since the mid-90s like some of our competitors, and I think that's great. But we don't do everything that has historically been kind of bucketed in this world for privileged access management, but what we do focus on is some of the most important things that people struggle with today at scale and that are high risk areas, right? To me, it's all about what is the littlest effort I can put into something and get the biggest impact, right? And that's really what we've been laser focused on with this problem. So to address that specifically, Secure One, and let me go ahead and try to share out my screen here real quick.
I guess simplicity is really important because we live in a world where we have a software solution for everything, and we want to do it fast and we want to make it accurate, and we don't have time anymore. So simplicity is really important.
That is very accurate. And then what we've just been talking about, the first part of the segment, was the remote workforce, right? In this global pandemic, I mean, if we thought we needed to do more with less before this, it is equally important to do more with less now. So solutions that are being put into a business case to be brought into an organization at this time, it needs to be very clear that they can solve a huge problem. I would say privileged access is a big component, right? An area of risk. And it must be something that the business can ingest and do with the same amount of people, or in some cases less, right? And I'm going to be brutally honest, historically, these projects, too difficult, time consuming to implement, can be 18 to 24 months to try to roll that out. And our data says that even if they get to that level, there's only a 30% efficacy of how much of that's even rolled out into the organization. I mean, that is not the right, calculus that you want to try to reduce your security risk, right? So what we've been able to do, just real briefly, is to create, are you seeing my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see your screen. Mm-hmm.
So Secure One is the platform purposely built to address three major key things. One, a lightweight capability that doesn't take a significant amount of time to address your risk around agentless discovery of privileged access on premise and in the cloud. And then number two, once you find kind of the lay of the land, it's important to not do that once a year for an audit or once a quarter, just like vulnerability management. And I know you guys deal with this a lot, or just like asset management. You want to know where that is 24/7. There's nothing in the market today in this space except Secure One that lets you look at your environment from a privileged access perspective on a 24/7 basis, right?
Okay.
Smarttech, right? Mm-hmm. So what we want to do as I walk you through the login here is tie things into existing investments like multi-factor authentication. And I know in our poll, we had several people that said that they had rolled it out. Mm-hmm. So we integrate with those investments from MFA to a SIM and capitalize on what's already there to enhance the security controls around PAM. And let me see if I can talk and type at the same time here. And then the other component of what we do is center two-factor authentication to what we call just-in-time admin. And that's what we talked about earlier is the right access at the right time for just a period of time, and then that's all taken away. So what I'm doing now is going from my smartphone and I'm putting in my second factor. And this could be with Ping, Okta, Microsoft, whatever. We integrate via an integration of SAML or Radius, or for companies that don't have it, and I saw several folks haven't rolled that out, we ship with Google or Microsoft Authenticator for free as part of the licensing model. So again, ROI instant, right? So when I plug that in, the thing you're going to see is our dashboard that brings in the whole view of what we're seeing with privileged access in your environment. And we integrate directly with Microsoft Active Directory. So we always know what's going on with your Active Directory structure. And this is often the challenge with organizations is, Active Directory is easy to roll out. It's easy to create groups. It's easy to create nested groups. The problem is that then swells your administrative sprawl. So this immediately gets you a view of your Active Directory ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And in our very small demo environment, you can see that we've got a few systems in here showing admin access. We're able to enumerate that for you at an Active Directory level, as well as an individual workstation or a computer level to show you where all these accounts are in real time, near real time. So you'll see the highest privileged accounts, the highest risk systems. This can all be done within minutes and hours, even in the largest organizations. So scale from an agentless perspective is huge. And I just want to pause and see if you have any questions around the dashboard here and what it's telling us and our viewers right now. Any questions on this, Ray Luca?
I don't have a question on the dashboard per se. I have a question on how is it, let's say, how fast can you get it up and running? How fast can you get to this dashboard from, you mentioned that it's relatively fast. For an organization, let's say, of 5,000 employees.
Yeah, so we can take a virtual appliance and put that in a client's environment. We also have a physical hardware appliance too, if that's preferred, and maybe in some large organizations it's preferred. But within 2 hours, we can have the appliance downloaded, spun up in the environment, and only a non-privileged service account. This is very, very important. We don't need administrative access from our appliance, and this can be deployed on-premise or in the cloud, to go out and do this discovery that I just mentioned to you. It's agentless, a non-privileged service account, and as soon as we have that non-privileged service account that the organization gives us, we're able to go ahead and look at Active Directory for us, multiple domains, and give them this discovery of what I said earlier is shadow access, right? Access that they didn't even know existed, and within minutes is going to start to populate around accounts, both human and non-human accounts. So in 2 hours or less, including downloading infrastructure, an organization can have a privileged picture of where their risk is at scale.
That's amazing. Okay. That's a really good turnaround time.
It is. And so when we talk about ROI, the ROI is instantaneous because in, I'd say 99% of organizations that we see, this screen creates some challenges of, oh no, I knew we had a lot of access out there, but we haven't been able to truly quantify it at scale. And if you think about big companies with a lot of employees, a lot of computers, a lot of locations, maybe they're buying companies and inheriting Active Directory ecosystems, that access profile or attack surface is massive. And in many cases, all that is backing or preventing these accounts for authentication is just username and password. There's no MFA or anything. So if they get that credential, phishing, hash, or ticket, it's over. They can walk the network.
And I guess for companies that also have a lot of third-party access, they can also see that. And that's really powerful because it is some sort of a gray area for many companies. They don't know what type of third-party access they have. They have contractors who have finished a long time ago and still have privileges. So I guess that's also something that can be seen on the platform.
Yeah, and you're very intuitive in the sense that more people, you're a good example of third-party contractor, right? Where you're going to be coming in and helping a client and augmenting, and you may have admin rights. So what we're seeing is organizations, one, don't really know where those accounts are. They usually live a 24/7 access. And the other thing too is even if you wanted to get those under control in a traditional privileged access management solution, you would have to pay licensing fees to kind of vault those accounts for those third parties, right? So what happens? That gets expensive, and companies look at their budget and go, I can't license for what I think is the number of accounts I need. So they'll shrink the number of accounts and they'll create generic or shared accounts, which is what you do not want to do, because then you have no clue of who's using what account and when, right? For the most part. So we want to make sure that you can extend this to all employees and all third parties to really extend just-in-time admin to the masses and do it cost effectively. So that's why we focus on very similar to how an EDR technology would be licensed. We license the computer essentially to protect it, and then it's unlimited users.
Yeah, we're running a question here.
Yeah.
The answers are pretty scary to some degree. I mean, 25% of people don't know whether the company allows third parties to have privileged level access to systems. And actually 60% do allow them. So it just shows that there's many cases of allowing access to third parties and not controlling it, which if you remember, some of the most notable data breaches have happened due to exactly that.
Totally. And it's third-party risk is something we've been trying to solve for many, many years, and it's difficult. I don't think anybody has a silver bullet. But what can we do? Again, low investment, high impact, to make sure that those people don't have 24/7 access, and they have to use what would be considered best practice, like multi-factor authentication, to be able to get into your systems, right? So
I'm very interested to learn more about the SIM integration. As you know, we're a big IBM Curator house. We use other SIMs as well for some of our customers. What SIM solutions do you integrate with? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and sorry if that's ringing in the background. I don't know if you can hear that or not.
No.
If that was me. Okay, good. It had a little ringing going on in my ears, so I'm glad that wasn't for everybody else. Yeah, so what we fundamentally believe is there are a lot of investments in the IT and the security organization, and I was at a large reseller, so I know on average, a good sized company, a Fortune 2000 company, may have 80 security products in their portfolio, right? So we feel like it's an injustice if you don't take that into account and know that I don't want to be a SIM. Other companies have solved that. There's other companies that have built really great technologies. But what I do want to do is create a platform that's pluggable into those solutions using standards, APIs, things of that nature. So, we plug into the common SIMs that you would hear out there, right? Being syslog capability. So, we even have CAN capabilities with Splunk and things of that nature, where our telemetry that you saw that we're gathering on a continuous basis of who's who on what boxes from an admin level is being then piped into the SIM for correlation in the SOC. So, if an event happens, an incident happens, and you guys know this better than anybody, it's very difficult sometimes to go, what happened, right? It was a security event. What did that credential do and where did it go? And is that a credential that's generic or shared, right? And who did it? Or if somebody breaks something, oh man, I mean, having admin access as a developer or an IT person during the day, and they do a change outside of a change window, they break stuff. So that's the other thing. It's like, who did that? Like who had admin rights on there and who broke it? So that all that telemetry is important, not only for security, but IT operations. And then, from multi-factor authentication, as I mentioned, if you have, Ping, Okta, SailPoint, I mean, all of those common tools, we use SAML integration to basically plug into that. But we've also had many of the folks that are viewing today may not have an MFA tool. We've seen that in the poll. We want to give that to you for a tool that's embedded, and that's where Google and Microsoft come in, because to me, it's all about cheaper, better, faster to reduce your risk and be able to do that. And then the other thing that we're super excited about, and this could be across the board, I'll use it as IT service management, right? ITIL best practices of, hey, I need something done that usually requires a ticket, that usually requires administrative access. How do I manage that without just saying, okay, everybody has admin rights everywhere? And that's kind of what happens today. And I think where the discipline is coming is using those ticket systems to really get your help desk people in there, your developers in there, your infrastructure people there, so you can manage change so something doesn't break, and you've got a controlled process. But what you want to be able to do is not make them to go to 3 other systems to get admin rights to go do the change, right? So we're seeing a huge benefit of integrating with ITSM systems like ServiceNow, through API integrations, to where you don't even leave ServiceNow to get, admin capabilities. Is you basically take the ticket, you work the ticket, and then we automate the provisioning of your admin account into that system that you need to do work on. And then when your change is complete and you close out the ticket, we pull your admin access away. Again, going back to that default deny position,
That's very powerful.
which is best practice. Yeah, best practice.
Yeah. That's super powerful, especially in the case where I was just mentioning about third-party contractors. If you have a lot of third-party contractors with admin rights, you can just put in a rule in place. It's automatically killed when the person leaves, and that's it. You don't have to worry about the gaps. So
that's right.
That's a cool, very cool feature.
Yeah.
Okay. We actually have a few questions from the audience that I'd like to address. Typically, password vaults, spam tools slow down operations. How do you improve the end user experience?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Again, the fewer the clicks, the better, right? I mean, whether you're looking at a website or you're trying to do admin work. So what we want to do, and I think that segue we just had with a ServiceNow example or a ticketing system, is the fewer systems that they need to do their job, the happier and the more pleasant the experience is going to be. So I don't want a dev or an admin to have to click 13 times to go check out something and then go use their tool. I want to just elegantly and dynamically provision their access when they need it and then take it away when they're done. So that's our whole thesis. And I mean, I've had many customers have deployed across their organization, both workstations and servers. And these are organizations that have tens, thousands of machines, right? And what has been so great to hear is the software has been easy to use. A large financial system, right? The admins and the devs aren't complaining. And that's a huge win. When you get, and they naturally love to complain, having been on that side, if something slows me down, I'm going to complain about it. So our design principle is to make it incredibly easy to use. And that's just not, I mean, you can interview 10 companies that have rolled out password vaults. 9.5 of them are going to say they wouldn't describe those as easy to use. In some cases necessary. I'm not saying those are bad, but like when you are growing your business, you're doing cloud, you're rolling up ephemeral workloads for developers, that has to be integrated and streamlined into your workflow. You can't slow that down because, again, the attackers are relying on you not protecting that stuff, right?
Exactly. And you want to make it, easy for the users to use so that they will actually use it. We have another question. I work in compliance. Does the tool allow me to export reports for my compliance mandates?
Yeah, great question. So, real simple. The security and IT folks don't love this, but we often say that you can give an auditor a read-only account and say, it's very powerful for you to be able to tell an auditor, whether it's GDPR or ISO or, PCI or whatever, to say, well, we monitor our privileged access in real time. And oh, by the way, they don't have access to these machines until they do a just-in-time ad. Like when you tell them that, they're ecstatic about that. But then when you say, and by the way, we can attest to that with you logging in with a read-only account and looking at it, or in many ways, here's a CSV export of all the computers, all the access, and you plug it into your GRC tool, your governance risk and compliance tool, and you have that when you need it on demand, right? And when you do that, the audit and compliance folks get very, very happy. And I'm going to be honest, we talked about ROI. The the amount of time it used to take me and my staff to compile admin access for a PCI, level 1 report was intense. And they don't want to do it. It takes away from their day job. So when you can just automate that and make that part of your normal day-to-day process, it isn't such a huge lift on your employees that don't have time to do it.
That's exactly true. I mean, especially if you work in compliance, if you're a compliance director, you're supposed to show reports to your board. Especially if you're a DPO, you answer to the board, and it needs to be easy to read, and you need to quantify the risk. Speaking of the risk, and we're getting close to ending the event. We're actually offering all of our attendees a free risk assessment. I think there's going to be a handout here in this section. Oh yeah, there it is. You can download it. It's just a quick brochure which details the risk assessment, which is free for our attendees today. Before we finish, JD, do you have any parting tips for our audience about, general access control and privileged access management?
Yeah, let me, while I'm chatting on that, let me throw this up just so we can have that running in the background. Hopefully everybody can see that. So that's the download and the opportunity here. What I want to say is this doesn't have to be hard. I respect and appreciate the honesty of some of the folks on there about saying, I don't have much knowledge of PAM, privileged access management, and it seems to be hard. What we're trying to say is it doesn't have to be hard. And I think anybody that takes Smarttech up on this will say, and see, that was super easy to understand my gaps I have with visibility in privileged access, and then the plan that could be laid out to remediate some of those challenges and not disrupt your operations folks. And just know that this approach to just-in-time admin scales. It's easy to use, and fundamentally you can extend it out to those third parties that, quite frankly, you're getting more and more in your organization, probably going to get more and more in this pandemic of third parties, coming in and managing infrastructure, maybe as you scale up or scale down capabilities. So having that is really peace of mind for chief information security officers, for compliance, and even the board, that this problem, which is the number one problem, can be addressed and not something that you have to stick your head in the sand because it seems to be too hard. That's probably the biggest thing.
I guess visibility is just so important. You may be working in an organization that has loads of accounts left open, and you never know about this. So just gaining that visibility makes it really important and allows you to quantify the risk.
That's a great kind of ending thought, right? So it's the whole thing is, if you don't know what's out there, how can you protect it? I mean, that's fundamental. So when we look at some of our past assessments, and I will tell you, it's not that, hey, we knew these accounts were out there. It's like when you show this transparency, it's in every company. It's not just the companies that don't have the big budgets. It's in the companies with the big budgets that this access is out there. So like on a workstation, for example, on a 15,000 kind of person computer or infrastructure, 480 admin accounts are sitting out there with just username and password that have access on that.
Yeah.
Right. That's too much. And that's just,
sometimes admin, right?
Oh yeah. Domain admin. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep. Correct.
With an admin password. Yeah.
Yes. So visibility is important. That's the first phase, and that can be done very quickly. And then even like for a company like Lockheed Martin, which I know rings true because it's a global defense in space giant, even with their environment, we were able to roll this out extremely quickly, get them into a deployment in about 3 months, over 150,000 workstations to this just-in-time admin piece. And then for the most part of the 3 years of deployment, they've fundamentally had one full-time resource overlooking that infrastructure. And that is the closing message: is total cost of ownership is not even close with this kind of approach to reduce your risk and manage it ongoing, right? So thanks for having me, Rayluca. I appreciate the partnership. I really am looking forward to having some of the folks take advantage of this free risk assessment. I think it'll provide a lot of visibility into their environment.
We do have one last question from the audience.
Yeah.
How much resources would it take to dedicate to the risk assessment, and how long would it take for example, 2,000 users?
Yeah, so good question. Like we said earlier, within 2 hours, if you have the ability to download a virtual appliance and give us a non-privileged account, we will show you across those 2,000 endpoints in less than 15 minutes where all that access is, right? And then, I mean, if you want to talk about, well, how can I then prove in, I mean, the transparency is good. How can I set up a couple of test machines, a workstation and a server, to try to do this just-in-time admin and zero standing privilege? That literally takes only a day or two to kind of set that up and get a couple of the stakeholders in to go through the workflow. And you pretty much know what that looks like. How do I get access to a system when I didn't have, when I just had username and password before? What's the new way of getting access? So the proof of value is very quick, super simple. And the ROI is significant even in the proof of value, right? Because we're looking at your production data.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's very good. And I can already get some feedback from the audience. Everyone's saying that's very cool. That sounds great. So that's a fantastic turnaround. So if you guys are interested in running the risk assessment, contact us and we'll make that work for you. So JD, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. That was very informative. Thank you to everyone who joined us from all over the world, and we look forward to engaging with you soon.
Thanks very much. Be safe, be well, everybody.
Thank you.